Слава Україні!
Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that everyone's doing good and that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There has been a ton of stuff that has been ongoing throughout the world over the last 48 hours, and a lot of very big changes when it comes to geopolitics in areas such as Ukraine, and of course those areas that were affected by Hurricane Ian, as well as other geopolitical situations in places such as Africa. So please, I implore you to please check out the video description. At this point, the reason being for that is because the whole point of this news channel is we are 100% about charities. We're not interested in kind of making money off of other people's misery. And so that's why here at the New News, we're 100% dedicated to raising money for different organizations and trying to help with the millions, and I mean millions, hundreds of millions of people that are currently affected by these crises globally, and to kind of bring awareness to a lot of them. And to also give you an independent news place where you can find, news what's going on throughout the world in kind of an apolitical way. And so with that, I please implore you to check out the video description. You're going to see a ton of organizations down there. We added one today that is directly related to Hurricane Ian disaster relief there in Florida, even though it continues to rage on the East Coast, and we'll continue to keep updated with that situation. Please, if you can't give a lot to these organizations, please give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Help us grow this thing. Help us grow this project. The more people that come here, the more people that enjoy the news, or at least, or find it informational and join in on this community, the more good overall we're going to be able to do, the more of an impact we'll have as a community. So please, we're never doing super chats. We're never pushing any kind of merchandising. We're never monetizing any of this. 100% of everything we do will always be for charity. And if you have more donation links and organizations, please check us out on the Discord, get in touch with a staff member, and we'll start getting that vetting process going through. And we're actually vetting several that were submitted by you guys as well. So please, if you have more, especially in areas that we don't already cover, please send them to us. Now, as we get into the news, and before we do, there's a ton of stuff happening geopolitically. A lot of this can be very, very complicated, and a lot of it may not make sense, especially to those that are, didn't serve in the military for a lot of these conflict zones and such as that. So to give you, I please implore you to ask questions. I am watching the stream chat, and so if you have a question about something, please feel free to ask it. I will answer it to the best of my ability. To give you a little bit of an idea as to my background and my expertise, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I was an 0352 anti-tank missileman, and I served in 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and I did 2 tours to the Middle East. My first tour, I did a stint of 4.5 months inside the country of Syria in support of Operation Inherent Resolve, and I also did a month and a half in Kuwait in transit. I also did my second deployment where I was with the Crisis Response Force out of Kuwait, and I was in charge of anti-armor operations at the Baghdad Embassy complex when we went there on the New Year's of 2020. I was one of the 100 Marines that responded to that crisis. I also trained Marines in Saudi Arabia that were getting ready to deploy to Yemen, as well as other supporting efforts across the Operation Inherent Resolve campaign theater. So please, I implore you to ask questions. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I'm a fully cross-trained machine gunner, and I'm also, of course, a rifleman. So if you have any questions in those fields, I'll be more than happy to answer them. If you have other fields, I'll answer them to the best of my ability. But I always implore you as the viewer to always do your own research. Please do your own research. Don't believe everyone on the internet, folks. It's just not safe. With that, we get ready to dive into the news, of course, starting off with our special report down here in Ukraine, and starting off here in Kyiv, where today we first find out that more Ukrainians did return to safety. Quote, 4 Marines and 2 civilians returned to Ukraine after another round of prisoners of war exchange. That's coming from Andriy Yermak, who is the head of the office of the President of Ukraine. So good to hear more Ukrainians are coming back and being, coming back to being liberated and having their freedom again, and they're coming back to safety overall, as we know what kind of happens if you are in any kind of Russian, if you're inside of any kind of Russian controlled area, or inside of one of those filtration camps or prisoner of war camps. It's pretty terrible. The best way to describe it is being inside of a giant concentration camp. As we continue, though, the news doesn't get so nice, and that's because we see another child casualty update coming from the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 397 Ukrainian children have died, and 780 children have been injured. This war continues to affect most of course, children, which will have to live with, if they survive this war, will have to live with trauma. 2/3 of Ukrainian children have actually fled the country, with another third either being internally displaced, living in occupied areas, or have not yet evacuated. Many institutions across the country have been absolutely decimated and destroyed, and even blatantly targeted by Russian forces as they continue this war of attrition and scorched policies throughout the country. And speaking of destroyed infrastructure, we get an update on that as well. This is coming from the Euromedid Press. And we see that 291 educational institutions and 127 healthcare institutions have been completely destroyed. An additional 2,000 plus educational institutions and 800 plus healthcare institutions have been damaged, along with 500 plus cultural heritage sites or institutions, and 270 religious buildings have also been damaged. One of those being, today is the 81st anniversary of the infamous Baber Yar, which occurred here, where they exterminated a large portion of the Jewish population inside of Ukraine under Nazi occupation. Baber Yar was actually struck by Russian forces using rockets back in March. So, yeah, they definitely have struck at some pretty very well known cultural places and places of remembrance, especially when it comes to the Holocaust. However, the big news out of Kyiv today is the fact that Ukraine signed and has officially applied to join the NATO alliance. That is correct. NATO, the Ukrainian authorities signed, including President Zelensky, the spokesman of the Verkhovna Rada, and the Prime Minister, all signed the document requesting to join the NATO alliance, which stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is a defensive alliance that was developed during the Cold War to counter the Soviet Union in order to protect Western Europe, that has grown to 30 separate countries, soon to be 32, with the accession of Finland and Sweden, which is only 2 countries away, the last 2 being Hungary and Turkey. And this would also add another one to that, and of course Ukraine, which has originally kind of been eyeing the NATO ball for a little bit now, especially since 2014 and when Russia attempted to annex Crimea. So they are requesting an accelerated treatment, much in the manner of that of Finland and Sweden as well, hoping to join the NATO alliance as quickly as possible. And you can see this is coming from the General Staff of Ukraine. There was an address that went with this. Unfortunately, I could not find one that had a translation to it. I apologize. But this is the official photo of them after signing that document requesting to become part of the NATO alliance. This address was made shortly after the addresses there in Russia and is in direct response to that. If Putin said one of the reasons for starting this war is to prevent NATO expansion, it would appear that he has appeared to be, as has been highly announced today, the single-handed best salesman of NATO in history. But as we continue on here, we actually kind of skip over the Kharkiv Oblast today, and we begin to get immediately into the conflict in the Donbass. And that conflict is centering right now around the city of Lyman, or what can be better called the Lyman Pocket. As we jump up over here to the north of Lyman, just across the Sibirsky Donets River, we see the city of Drobyshiv, which has been successfully liberated by Ukrainian troops. Specifically, the 81st Airborne Brigade is the unit which has liberated this. And this is pretty significant gains which have been made over the last about 48 hours since we last kind of reported this news. Significant amounts of combat have been ongoing across the entirety of the front, specifically in the northern part of the Donetsk region and centered around the little city of Lyman, which today it would appear that Russian forces, which are reportedly nearly or completely encircled at this point, are attempting to retreat out of Lyman officially after several weeks of long, bitter battles in the surrounding woodlands. And what we're seeing here is and this is coming from satellite footage of them. This is a Russian convoy inside of Lyman, which came out earlier today, of Russian forces gathering and apparently preparing to leave the city as their positions have become relatively untenable and undefensible. And we can see the southern approach regarding the counteroffensive here and regarding the encirclement movement. We're over here. This is in Brusivka, where we saw M113s, which are an armored personnel carrier variant, which has been donated to Ukraine as a NATO armored personnel carrier. And we see that they were moving here in Brusivka towards the Lyman Pocket. We actually have a video of this as well. Take a look. So happy to see that, and I also believe I did not show the actual media of this. So this is over here. This is in Dobroshchiv.
Отже, сьогодні, 30 вересня, Збройні сили України, а саме 81-ша окрема аеромобільна бригада, звільнила населений пункт Дробишево. Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава десантно-штурмовим військам! Слава! 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 Слава десантно-штурмовим військам! Слава! Слава! Слава!
And that was posted by the Department of Defense of Ukraine, or Ministry of Defense, rather. As we move over here, continuing on this southern part of the Lyman Pocket, we are starting to see, we have seen that Yampill, which is also here along the Seversky Donetsk River, just across it, on the, it's kind of a southeastern side of Lyman, has been successfully liberated. And we're getting this from a couple of different sources now to see Ukrainian forces pushing throughout this area. And as you can see here, sorry, this one has some copyright music in it, but you can see they're moving through the woodlands and along the outskirts here, continuing on to the front. With, you normally aren't going to see this in a hot zone, and we're seeing quite an amount of destroyed equipment as well. Today has been a ton of destroyed and captured equipment once again. We continue to see those losses, especially material losses, rolling quite heavily, as well as Russian casualties, which are rather brutally announced pretty highly along message boards coming from Ukrainian sources there at the front lines. And they're showing off all of the wonderful goodies which they are capturing off of these guys, including cigarettes, of course. But most of these areas where you're going to see heavy combat are just absolutely destroyed. I mean, they have been leveled. Russia is really maintaining a pretty heavy scorched earth policy. And here's the announcement of Yampill being liberated.
Ну що, котики, Ямпіль наш.
It's also fantastic to see these guys wearing PVS-14s. That is a PVS-14 night vision device, and that, of course, allows these guys to operate in the nighttime. You have to understand that neither of these countries are really operating very heavily when it comes to nighttime operations. It's very limited in its scope. Neither country really has a lot of nighttime optics, whether you're talking about thermal or night vision optics. However, it seems that Ukraine is garnering even more and more and more of these, which is definitely making it much more feasible for them to continue fighting at times when Russians simply cannot. And it's a real game changer. Every little small thing you can do, you know, aircraft and artillery cannot take and hold ground. They will level everything in their path, but they cannot take and hold ground. The guys, it's the basic infantryman that's going to be closing with your enemy, killing your enemy, taking and holding that ground. It doesn't matter anything else. You can bomb a place, but if you don't control it on the ground, you're not going to do a whole lot. So every small feature that you're seeing in an improvement in Ukrainian infantry is a huge game changer. Night vision optics being more readily fielded means that the infantry can now operate in nighttime in nighttime capacity, meaning that they double the amount of time that they can fight in active combat and engage their enemy, and immediately putting them at an advantage. Any ranged optics, like we've seen, of course, the RCO, which is an advanced combat optical gun sight. It's normally produced by the company of Trigicon. We see that they are using that. It's a 4-powered fixed scope. And we're seeing that being heavily employed as well as NATO small arms weaponry, even up to and including the Browning M250 cal. We're seeing, I believe we've seen a couple of Mark 19s at this point, and we've of course seen a lot of HK 416s, I believe is what they are. Of course, the M4, M4A1s. As well as many other variants, probably of the AR-15. We've seen SCARs, both light and heavy versions. So we're seeing a lot of NATO small arms coming into this, and their optics that come along with them, whether they be thermal optics or just fixed scopes. All of this stuff adds significantly to the combat strategies and what you can do on the ground with your ground forces. These infantrymen, every small advantage over the Russians is a huge advantage when fielded in enough numbers. Unfortunately, Kramatorsk was shelled as we begin to get into really the bloody streak of what has turned out to be what Russian annexation is all about. Of course, for those that may not know, Russia announced the annexation of the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. We'll be getting to that here when we get to the international news more in depth. However, what we are seeing here is that annexation is mostly based in blood, and that is because we see a significant amount of brutal strikes against civilian targets over the last 48 hours, seeing mass casualties. And as we can see here, 11 individuals were injured in morning shelling during the morning of the 29th, and this was reported by Pavlo Krylenko, who is the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. Take a look. So that's coming from Pavlo Krylenko, the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. He does have photos going along with this. These were taken earlier in the day. You can see some of these craters. These are pretty massive amounts of ordnance that were hitting these locations. And most of the time when we're talking about ordnance hitting these locations, we're talking about just indiscriminate shelling, normally hitting residential areas and civilian infrastructure. Normally speaking, we're not really seeing any destruction of any kind of significant military targets on the point of the Ukrainians. That's really what we're seeing across the board here. And now, time for a little bit of an educational lesson with this next news point. Now, I talk about things quite often here, and I pull up things, especially the UN, pretty frequently here. But today we see, once again, the usage of incendiary munitions against Bakhmut. Bakhmut was struck with incendiary munitions once again. A tactic is becoming ever more frequent amongst Russian forces because of their frustrations and making lack of gains there on the ground. Now, Ukrainian cities at this point have been targeted with things such as thermite and even more so white phosphorus. Most of the time, these munitions are used for demolitions in the case of thermite, and more for producing smoke screens over a mass area to hide movement, obscure movement. And that's what we're really seeing with the usage of white phosphorus. You're not supposed to use these inside of areas that require that have high amounts of civilians in them, and you're also not supposed to use them against civilian targets. In fact, it breaks several different parts of the Geneva Convention. First of all is the protocol on prohibiting or restrictions on the use of incendiary weapons, and that's coming from Protocol 3 of the Geneva Convention, which is right here. And What we see here is, for the purpose of this protocol, incendiary weapon means any weapon or munition which is primarily designed to set fire to objects or to cause burn injury to persons through the action of flame, heat, combination thereof, or produced by a chemical reaction and substance delivered onto the target. Incendiary weapons can take the form, for example, flamethrowers, foul gases, shells, rockets, grenades, mines, bombs, and containers of incendiary substances. They do not include munitions which have incendiary effects, such as illuminants, tracers, smoke, and signal systems. Munitions designed to combine penetration, blast, or fragmentations effects with the additional incendiary effects, such as armor-piercing projectiles, fragmentation shells, explosive bombs, and similar effect. Munitions with the incendiary effect is not specifically designed to cause burn injury to persons, but to be used against military objectives, such as armored vehicles, aircraft, and installations and facilities. Okay, so skipping all of the definitions of everything here, what we get to is 4 basic points. It is prohibited in all circumstances to make the civilian population, as such, individual civilians or civilian objects, the object of attack by incendiary weapons. That would be any city such as Bakhmut. It is prohibited in all circumstances to make any military objective located within a concentration of civilians the object of attack by air-delivered incendiary weapons. Meaning, you cannot use incendiary weapons even if the military objective is in the town. It is further prohibited to make any military objective located within the concentration of civilian objectives the object of attack by means of incendiary weapons other than air-delivered incendiary weapons, except when such military objective is clearly separated from the concentration of civilians, and all feasible precautions have been taken to view the limiting and incendiary effects in the military objective and avoiding, and in any event, to minimizing incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects. That is not what we see at all. They just completely shower the place. It is prohibited to make forests or other kinds of plant cover the object of attack by incendiary weapons, except when such natural elements are used to cover, conceal, or camouflage combatants or other military objectives, or are themselves military objectives. Yeah. That's a thing. And, in case you're wondering, so I appear to have forgotten to actually. I got so frustrated with this. I actually just grabbed the thing. I didn't actually grab the. Well, that sucks. Huh. And Protocol 2, additional to the Geneva Conventions of 12 August 1949, in relation to the protection of victims of the International Armed Conflicts, Protocol 1. Meaning, after we scroll through this 43-page document of why you shouldn't do this, and jump down here, should be able to get it in sections 52. General protection of civilian objects. Should not be object of attack or of reprisal. Civilian objects are all objects which are not military objectives, defined in paragraph 2. Attack shall, and this is part 2 of Article 52. Attack shall be limited strictly to military objectives. Insofar as objects are concerned, military objectives are limited to those objects which, by their nature, location, or purpose, or make an effective contribution to the military action and whose total or partial destruction, capture, or neutralization, in the circumstances ruling at the time, offers a definite military advantage. In case of doubt whether an object is normally dedicated to civilian purposes, such a place of worship, a house or dwelling, or a school is being used to make an effective military contribution, it shall be presumed not to be so. So what does this mean? So all of this is simply stating that you cannot use military weaponry in a means or method which cannot limit the effects of collateral damage. That is what this means. It does not limit the means or methods of collateral damage. And that's military planning. So you can't just blatantly shell places like we've seen. You can't just drop incendiary munitions on a town, as you can see. There's 2 violations of the Geneva Convention. And even if there is a military target here, even if there are Ukrainian troops, Rule number 85 of the customary international humanitarian law rule states the anti-personnel use of incendiary weapons is prohibited unless it is not feasible to use a less harmful weapon to render a person hors de combat, which means combat ineffective. Prisoners of war, wounded, fall under that category. So that is what we're seeing. And so that's what we're seeing there in Bakhmut. And there's 3 reasons as to why that is illegal by the Geneva Convention. By the way, Russia is a party to all of those. Every Geneva Convention has been ratified and is followed by Russia. And every single protocol is ratified and followed by Russia. Every single party, they are also party to all of the customary international humanitarian laws. Now, we had a question here coming from Demise FPS. S300 missiles or just shelling? That's a really great question. So, when it comes to ordnance, it can be kind of difficult, especially when you're looking at fragmentation, for us to really identify this. Now, sometimes it can be a little bit easier. The attack on Kramatorsk with a Tochka U missile was pretty easily identifiable because of how much of the Tochka U missile was left. But we see it both being heavily used. And in fact, Russia converted a large number of S300 missiles to be able to hit surface targets. The S300 is meant to hit air targets. It's a surface-to-air, or a SAM missile system, and that was developed by the Russian Federation in the Soviet Union, partially, but mostly employed by the Russian Federation, and its point is to strike at, aircraft. The issue is that Russia is running out of purpose-built ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. So they have converted quite a significant number of these to strike targets on the ground, and they are not very accurate, for one. They're not very effective. We see a lot of issues when it comes to actually using these to target any kind of military structures. Sometimes they just straight up shoot their own cities with them because their missiles are so bad anyway. And they have a lot of faults in them, but they're running out of actual munitions for purpose-built ballistic missiles, and now they're using S300s. When it comes to the fragmentation off of these, it's very difficult to identify it. We don't get enough photos of any of the it simply doesn't have any there's not enough stuff there. Normally you can tell. I'm not an expert in that, nor am I an expert in counter battery, but there's just a ton of stuff there that it really, even though we can't tell what it is, it's still shelling. It's just, it's like, are we shooting 40 missiles at this, or are we going to shoot one big one? Is really what it comes down to for the Russian Federation. Is it in range of the 40 missiles, or is it in range of the 40 rocket salvo from the BM-21 Grad system? However, the leader of the Wagner group has been killed in action. Alexei Nagin was killed by Ukrainian troops there in the Donbass. So he has successfully been killed in action. Leader of the Wagner group. And we also see... So I'll just cut this out. This is a point of view from the Russian Federation. These are 2 Russian BTR-82As. Now, the BTR-82A is a BTR-80 that now has, normally it has a relatively small machine gun on top. It's normally like a 12.7 millimeter, which is still a pretty big machine gun. These have upwards of like 20, I believe it's 20 millimeter cannons essentially on the top of this thing. 20 millimeter autocannons. 2 of these things are firing at Ukrainian troops from a tree line, and immediately the Ukrainians respond with artillery. Immediately. Take a look.
О, красавцы. О, красавцы, Маринку разбил. Ай, блядь, красавчик. Ответочку чуть не получил. Ай, блядь. Красава. Все, пора в ёбу.
Now, something interesting to note from these BTR-82As. Now, this one is not anything really to take any notice about, but this one here is. So, if you see that, that's the rivet of St. George. And what that is this means that this particular BTR likely took part in the May 9th Victory Day parades. So that is normally the insignia you see on the May 9th Victory Day parade, and it also is uniquely identifying because normally this is worn specifically, while it's become a huge symbol for Russia anyway, but this is usually worn by Russian paratroopers specifically, have this insignia. At least they did until they all got killed, but they had this insignia on their uniform as well and on all of their vehicles. So this is possibly a Russian paratrooper or VDV vehicle, as well as we know that this probably took part in the Victory Day parades of May the 9th, probably last year in 2021. If not this year, and just immediately got transferred to the front. So this is the nice one. This one should look very, very nice compared to everything else that they're fielding. It should be in much better, well-kept condition. This is a very, very tough subject today. A Russian missile attack killed 30 people in Zaporizhia. Russian troops lost a missile attack on a line of civilian cars on their way out of the regional center, Zaporizhia, and that's coming from the Zaporizhia Oblast Governor Alexander Staruk. People were planning to depart the Russian-occupied territories to evacuate their relatives and to deliver humanitarian aid. That's coming from the Secretary of the Zaporizhia City Council, Anatoly Kurtiev. At the time of the strike, the column was comprised of 248 cars, and roughly 100 people were present on the spot. According to Tyrilo Tomashenko, the deputy head of the president's office, stated that according to preliminary data, Russia launched 16 missiles from the S300 surface-to-air missile system. 4 of them struck the car column in the territory of an auto market. 30 people are confirmed to have died. The National Police Chief Igor Klimenko said an 11-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy are among the dead in Russia's attack earlier today. Klimenko said 88 people were injured, including a 3-year-old girl. Melitopol Mayor Fedorov said doctors are fighting for the life of a 5-year-old girl with a shrapnel wound to her abdomen. The 3-year-old girl did end up surviving, but she is now an orphan as both of her parents were killed in the blast. Just some blurred parts of the aftermath there. Coming from UNICEF. And coming from the mission of the United Nations in Ukraine, Quote, the images of the attack on the outskirts of Zaporizhia this morning are shocking. Dozens of civilians killed or injured as they were bringing support to family and community members. Unfortunately, this was only one of several attacks impacting civilians over the last hour. And that's coming from Denise Bourne, who is the humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine from the United Nations. According to the Euro-Maiden Press, Vladimir Rogov, a Russian-appointed quisling heading the occupational administration of the Zaporizhia Oblast, first gleefully reported at 7:30 that Russia had hit military objectives in Zaporizhia. Then, when the massacre of the car column became known, he started to accuse Ukraine of shelling its own people in revenge. In Dnipro, a similar event took place. An entire family was killed, leaving only their loyal, terrified, and severely depressed dog alive. Alla, the grandmother, Natasha, the mother, Vasilia, the daughter, 12 years old, and Ivan, the son, 8 years old, and their second small younger dog, Jack, were killed instantly after their house took a direct hit from a Russian missile, which left the home nothing but rubble in a 20-meter wide crater. Parts of them and their home were found scattered across the neighborhood. The only survivor of the family was their dog, Krim, standing for Crimea, is both deaf and blind as a result of the blast, currently being treated by veterinarians. He was found sitting atop the rubble of his former home, crying. Quote, the Russian army hit several residential area in Dnipro with missiles. Several buildings were completely destroyed. 3 people died, including a child. 5 more were injured, including a 12-year-old girl, who later did die. Valentin Reznиченko, the head of the Dniprovitsk Regional Military Administration. And that is Krim sitting atop the rubble. And this is coming from Anton Gerashenko, who says, people literally evaporated. Grandma Alla, mom Natasha, daughter of Elsina, 12, son Ivan, 8, and little dog Jack. The rocket hit their home in Dnipro. No, to be honest, some didn't evaporate. They were found in their neighbors' roofs and streets nearby. Coming from Filatov, the Dnipro mayor. Ministry of Defense in Ukraine. Here is when they found Krim very early this morning.
Собака.
Here's some of the sites of the debris as they were cleaning up this morning. You can see that crater. That was a house. And there's an overview of what it looks like now. Once again, another horrendous strike by the Russian forces on the city of Dnipro. Striking, of course, people's homes and killing entire families. Down here in Crimea, across the Kirch Bridge, we see that Russian forces are dragging a ton of equipment into this war zone. We, of course, know that they've been pouring massive amounts of equipment into Ukraine for quite some time now. However, it seems that they're pouring even more in there now. And we're seeing that because they are probably getting ready to bring in those massive amounts of conscripts into the country, and they want to have this equipment prepped and staged. But several large columns of vehicles were spotted being dragged across on rail car across the Kirch Bridge.
Нихера себе везут, ребята, везут! Везут подмогу, блядь! Смотри, блядь, подмога какая! Ебануться нахуй, а! Все с консервацией, все набил, блядь! И она бесконечная, слушай! Сколько тут их, а? Слава русскому оружию, блядь! Дима, снимай нахуй! Ёкарный бабай, вот это красавцы, а! Видно, что не новое, блядь, с расконсервацией, но, блин. Да уж, красиво, блин.
So as you can see, they are bringing a ton of equipment across the Kirch Bridge. So jump up here, and we see that, quote, 2 Russian Su-25s were downed. Quote, the Armed Forces of Ukraine shot down 2 Russian Su-25 aircraft in the Mykolaiv region. That's coming from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. We are seeing quite high casualty rates amongst aircraft at this point. When it comes to the Russians, they are taking quite significant air losses there. Mykolaiv was also shelled as well. Quote, Russian forces attacked Mykolaiv with cluster munitions, caused an explosion near a public transit stop. 3 people were killed and 12 people were injured, and that's coming from Alexander Sienkievich, the mayor of Mykolaiv. And then last night, quote, Russian troops attacked residential areas in Mykolaiv with 2 rockets at night. One of the rockets hit a 9-story building. 9 people were wounded, and that's coming from Vitaly Kim, who is the head of the Mykolaiv Regional Military Administration. And so that is the situation there in the nation of Ukraine. But that's not all when it comes to the news. There is a ton of stuff happening internationally as well, and a lot of it has to do with the country of Ukraine. And as we begin our report, we start off here in Moscow. And we see that because Putin has officially annexed the 4 different sections of Ukraine, officially annexed in a bunch of sham referendums. The referendums in many times apparently got up to 99% support in the regions. Now, 99% support, that is like something like a North Korean statistic where the presidential election has one person on the ballot. Putin declared Kherson and Zaporizhia independent states before annexing them. Quote, Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared independence of Ukrainian regions, Zaporizhia and Kherson, as Moscow prepares to formally proclaim the annexation of Ukrainian territory in a major escalation of the 7th-month invasion at this point. 2 regions to be set to incorporate into Russia, along with the self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, in lavish ceremony in the Kremlin here today, after hastily organized referendums in the Russian-occupied regions, which claim majorities of up to 99% in favor of joining Russia. The ceremony, 8 years after Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine following the invasion in a similar vote, will take place at 3 p.m. local time, which occurred at 8 a.m. today in a columned Grigorsky Hall of the Grand Kremlin Palace, where marble plaques of engraved in gold commemorate Russian military heroes. And there's the official statement there. And this is the actual... Not that we need to watch the ad here. But if you want to watch the whole thing with the transcript, There's actually one for you. Can we please get over this ad? It's an hour long. We're not going to watch this all. But he did make that announcement, as well as had a huge speech. He annexed these areas. So, according to the Russians now, that means that all of Kherson, all of Zaporizhia, all of Donetsk, and all of Luhansk, none of which they completely control, are all now Russian territory. According to the Russians. It's all Russian territory now. This is Russia now, according to Russia. And in his speech, Putin talks about how this is all in accordance under the United Nations Charter and self-determination and everything. The United Nations damned him. Including Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, whose one job on the face of the earth is to uphold the Charter. That is his only job, is to make sure every country plays nice and that they are all upholding the Charter. It is his one job. And he says that this has absolutely no legal representation at all in the international community. The fact, of course, there is a United Nations Security Council meeting. Russia vetoed. There are three countries to abstain. I believe China, India, and one other abstained today. Brazil, damning them. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're seeing here. So yeah, it's just not. It's not good. It just doesn't. You can't just claim another country as your own. You just can't. This doesn't work in the 21st century. It's not how any of this works. Richard Cyberman says, I declared Canada my own property. Nothing came of it. Yeah, I know, right? Does that mean I can just make up my own country and my own laws and disregard the United States and any other nation in the world? Is that a thing? Japan is mine, says Zach Jeffers. Yeah. He says, a lot of people are referring to Hearts of Iron 4, which if you've never played or heard of that game, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. But yeah, this is basically... Russia is essentially writing fan fiction in real life. It's just... unbelievable. JL says, guys, breaking news now. What's the breaking news there, JL? Sweden, over here, found another leak. JL says that Russia has just annexed the SZ9 asteroid. Anyway, the Swedish Coast Guard found another leak today in the Nord Stream pipeline. Swedish Coast Guard has detected a fourth gas leak in one of the Nord Stream pipelines that crossed under the Baltic Sea carrying natural gas from Russia to Europe. According to the Swedish press, the leak was found on Nord Stream 2 and is close to another large stain almost a kilometer in diameter made of gas flowing out of Nord Stream 1 detected earlier this week. At this point, most countries believe it to be sabotage. Rooster says the moon belongs to America. We are the only country to make it there and plant a flag, and then we immediately said it belonged to nobody. As we jump down here and into the Middle East, we have a couple of developments. Turkey announced the detention of 18 Islamic State militants. The Turkish intelligence agency has announced the detention of 18 militants of the Islamic State. Another was eliminated. Operations took place last week in several settlements at once in northern Syria. During the searches in the houses of the jihadists, the security forces seized weapons, IEDs, and components for their manufacture, including 350 kilograms of explosives. On account of the detainees, at least 4 attacks on the Turkish militaries According to the intelligence services, the terrorists were preparing a series of terrorist attacks against the Turkish armed forces and organizations associated with Ankara in Syria. And there they are, folks, in all of their lovely glory. We've been successfully detained. Russian forces continue to bomb Syria. Russian forces attacked infrastructure in northern Syria today using their air force, specifically trying to target militants of the Syrian province of Idlib. The goal of the pilots was to weaken the terrorists near the settlements of Musiabin and Ruwaya. Information of the effectiveness of the attacks is not yet reported. This is the second stream in a row in which we have Russian forces bombing Syria. Keep in mind, last time they bombed a bunch of refugee camps, of all places. People that literally didn't have anything left, then they still bombed them.
حرب روسيا نفذ.
Sci-fi regarding Ukraine says, by default, it kind of means that Ukraine's at war with all of Russia and can start fighting on all borders of Russia. Ukraine's been at war with Russia since 2014. They have been at war with Russia. They have been. It's just Ukraine actually doesn't believe in changing international boundaries by use of force. They're trying to defend their homeland, not invade another country. You have that flip-flop. Screw that. No. Ukraine's been at war. They've been at war for years now. It's just this is now a full-fledged invasion of their country. By default, they were at war with Russia. So we move on to Tehran here. And really all of Iran. The death toll of the protests in Iran has climbed to 83 people, including children, according to Iran Human Rights at this point. The protests are currently ongoing, and the military and security forces, such as the IRGC or Iranian Republican Guard Corps, are attempting to crack down on the civilian protests, which have moved further on into their second week now. Protesters in Iran have set fire to banks in the city of Zahedan, or Sistan Baluchistan province, and Ansar Bank burned down as of today.
پاساژ گلستان بانکنفر پاساژ رویال چهار رسولی.
So fighting does continue to take place there in Iran, as it's really turned into, what appears to be a second Iranian revolution. His actor says it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Well, we smoke salami, so it's okay. However it's pronounced, we smoke salami. He was the leader of the Quds Force, by the way, the Quds Force. And Riley says, justice for Masa Amini. Yes, justice for Justice for Masa Amini, and also every Iranian who is really, really sick and tired of their very authoritarian government, which brutally suppresses them in many, many ways, for those that didn't know. Over here, an administration building in Afghanistan in Mandal district was seized by local residents. The reason for the protest was the murder of Burhanuddin Nuristani by the Taliban, who headed the local police under the Republic. Now the movement has lost control of the Mandal area. All officials and militants were forced to leave it. And an important detail that this hard-to-reach mountainous region borders the Panjshir province, which has become one of the strongholds of the anti-Taliban opposition, which is led by, oh geez, I used to be able to remember his name. He's the same one that he fights, he has the same name as his dad too, who also fought the Taliban with the Northern Alliance. Northern Alliance. Let's see if I can find this here. Yes, Ahmed Massoud. Ahmed Massoud. That is the one I'm looking for. So yes, Ahmed Massoud is the one who runs that in the Panjshir province. The residents in the area who seize the area demand that the Taliban try and punish those who brutally beat and killed Burhanuddin Nuristani. And the Taliban are trying to resolve the issue through local elders, but there's a very real danger of clashes. In the same scenario, the neighboring district of Duab fell out of the control of the Taliban. In the face of its overwhelming superiority of the rebels, officials and militants of the movement and retreated from there. The total number of the former is estimated to be about 1.5 thousand people with weapons. Further actions do look coordinated at this point, so it looks like there seems to be a resistance movement against the Taliban forming in this area. And in Kabul, a suicide attack at the Kabul Education Center killed at least 19 people this morning. In the Shia district of Kabul, Desht-e-Barachi. An explosion occurred outside of Kaj Higher Education Center, according to reports during the entrance exams. At the moment, according to local sources, about 20 people have been killed and about 40 more have been injured. There's nobody who has claimed responsibility for the attack so far. Nuguda says the Afghanistan war hasn't ended in decades and never seems to end. Really hasn't, and it's much longer reaching than just the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan back in 2001. It goes past 9/11 by quite a significant amount. There's a lot of history when it comes to Afghanistan and other countries in Afghanistan and other stuff. The Germans went to Afghanistan in World War One, so. There's a pretty long history of Europe and of Western powers in Afghanistan and trying to deal with the people there in interventions and wars. And the Soviet Union, what they call the Soviet Union's Vietnam, is actually the war in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union spent a decade in the nation of Afghanistan, pretty much leading right up into almost their collapse as a country. So it's been pretty long running. The fighting there just doesn't not seem to end. And it's probably not going to be a very stable area for a very, very, very long time. Coming out of South Korea, South Korea is going to send weapons worth $2.9 billion USD to Ukraine. The price for these supplies, which will be one of the largest during the conflict in Ukraine, will be paid for by the United States. And the weapons will be delivered from one of the Czech arms companies. They will be transferred as a gift to Ukraine. South Korean weapons cannot be sent directly to Ukraine due to Seoul's official position. Since the spring, Seoul has announced that despite the great interest in the Ukrainian side, will not send weapons to a country where there is a military conflict. Assistance can only be provided in sending non-lethal items, such as helmets or flak jackets. And in the Philippines, we actually get a little bit from the Filipino Islamic State. So The Philippines has a very, very large section of the Islamic State inside of its country, and it's something that's been they're fighting it very heavily, but it's something not really heavily talked about, not really brought to light by anybody outside that we can find anyway. And it's very rare footage at this point of the Southeast Asian branch of the Islamic State before attacking the positions of the Philippine army somewhere in the forest of Mindanao. We can see some of the footage coming out here. You are dumb. You are so dumb. Why would you shove your muzzle in the dirt? You know what? Keep doing what you're doing, bud. Yes, this is the Islamic State here in the Philippines. And yes, they do have a pretty big backing in the Philippines, believe it or not. The situation in the Philippines is actually pretty much more similar to that, not like Africa when it comes to the Islamic State. They're very, very well funded and backed there. Speaking of Africa, as we jump on to the continent, we have a couple of different developments. First of all, Uganda reported more cases of Ebola. 4 districts have confirmed cases, including Mubende, Kasanda, Kayagawa, and the Kagandi districts. The outbreak in Uganda is the first in a decade, and there have already been at least 50 cases and 24 deaths, at least 414 contacts identified. Next, they don't have enough personal protective equipment, such as gloves and masks, for some of the trainee physicians are on strike. 2 survivors of Ebola were discharged from the Mubende Regional Referral Hospital on today. A clinical trial of an experimental vaccine designed to protect against the Sudan strain of Ebola virus could soon begin here in Uganda. Yes, I'm very, very well aware that I cannot pronounce things. I apologize. I'm not meaning to offend anyone. I just don't have very good pronunciation for many of these things. I do try at least, but I cannot pronounce things very well. So I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to offend anyone if anyone does feel offended by that. I'm trying my best here. We're seeing a lot of these photos of them talking about the situation, and that's coming from the Uganda Red Cross. If you want more regarding the experimental vaccine that they're talking about possibly rolling out there soon, you can check out Stat News. Here we see the what we see is here in actually Kenya, which is already dealing with a massive drought as it's part of the Horn of Africa, and it's dealing with the huge drought there and already a ton of crises. And now they have a suspected Ebola case there in Kakamega County in Kenya. The Kenyan health authorities are on alert following a suspected Ebola case. A 32-year-old patient was admitted to the Mumias Hospital who's displayed Ebola symptoms. Preliminary tests revealed that he might not be having Ebola, but the patient is currently in the St. Mary Hospital isolation unit. Tanzania and South Sudan have heightened surveillance as well due to their shared borders with Uganda. And some rather interesting news coming out of Ouagadougou here in Burkina Faso. I've waited all night to pronounce Ouagadougou. It's the one I know. But here in Ouagadougou, we see that Burkina Faso soldiers have announced that they have overthrown the military government. Armed soldiers in fatigues and masks appeared on television in Burkina Faso on Friday night to confirm the ouster of President Paul-Henri Damiba and the second coup of the troubled West African country this year. Burkina Faso's new leader is the army captain Ibrahim Traore. Traore appeared on television surrounded by soldiers and announced the government was dissolved, the constitution suspended, the borders closed. He declared a nightly curfew. We're going to have more information on this. You can always go and check out Reuters, who have a more in-depth report on that. But yes, Burkina Faso has a new government by force. They have had a coup d'etat there in Ouagadougou. There's also been an outbreak of cholera in Syria. Over 2,000 confirmed cases. The WHO and UNICEF have already started sending medicine to help. So yes. So there's another crisis. So you jump over here and into North America and into the Caribbean. We have some of the first images coming out of the aftermath of the very, very powerful Hurricane Ian, which ended up striking the Fort Myers area yesterday as a very strong Category 4 hurricane. It was showing wind speeds of sustained wind speeds of 155 miles per hour, and it had up to 16-foot storm surges onto the beach, and that was at low tide. High tide came in shortly after the storm, and we're seeing rainfall upwards of 20 inches in many areas. It has now passed over Florida and is currently striking. It has made landfall officially in South Carolina, which we will get to there later, and is moving into North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, Virginia, and is supposed to be pushing its way all the way up to West Virginia, with some impacts hitting southeastern Ohio as well. So at this point, it was down to a tropical storm after it got out of Florida, and it rebuilt strength and became a hurricane once again before it struck South Carolina and made its second landfall in the United States. Down here, this is on Sanibel Island. Sanibel Island took a direct hit, and the Army National Guard on Sanibel Island is currently assisting in medical evacuations and search and rescue efforts, which we can see here. There's also some images and videos coming out from Department of Defense here. We're not going to watch these videos; they're a little long. They've rescued cats and dogs and people and everything, but they do have a set of photos. You can see that you can see just the cleanup efforts, and some of the destruction here is just immense. This is all coming from Sanibel Island. Just immense amounts of destruction. The Sanibel Causeway was destroyed by Hurricane Ian as well. It's the only road in and out of Sanibel and Captiva. And this is the Sanibel Causeway here. It has completely collapsed. And there's that higher overview of that. You can see where it completely collapsed there on this end. So that's before. And that's after. Before, after. Before, after. Fort Myers, you can see aerial footage of the extent of the damage here. If this is down here in Fort Myers. This aerial footage is coming from CNN. Just, it's almost inconceivable. It'll take some time to really bring to light just how much the destruction really was. And speaking of that, so according to the National Hurricane Center special briefing on Ian, which occurred today at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Ian has made landfall in Georgetown, South Carolina, and is moving inland. Heavy rains now spreading into North Carolina. Dangerous storm surge continues along the coast of the Carolinas this evening. Tropical storm force winds are expected along the coast of South Carolina and southeast North Carolina coming through early Saturday. Rainfall flooding risk can affect inland up to Charlotte, North Carolina, and all areas closer to the coast. The National Hurricane Center urged people to stay indoors and not drive outside as conditions can get very dangerous at night. There are risks of tornadoes which could affect areas along the Interstate 95 area, the Interstate 95 freeway. Coming from the National Hurricane Center there, which they do have an entire section dedicated to Hurricane Ian. At least 21 deaths have so far been reported. The true death toll might not be clear for weeks, however. Some Florida residents in areas hardest hit by the Hurricane Ian are at risk of being without power for more than a month as providers reportedly need to rebuild infrastructure. There are currently 42,000 linemen responding to more than 1.9 million reported power outages. More than 700,000 accounts in southwest Florida have been restored, and more than 5,000 National Guardsmen from multiple states are in Florida in order to assist the communities. This is before Ian. And that is after. If you want more on that, you can check out The Hill. Now, one of the sections that we added tonight, if you take a look in the description, is because, of course, it's a disaster response and people need significant amounts of help. Donations have poured in to the Florida Disaster Fund, surpassing $10 million in just 24 hours of being activated. The Florida Disaster Fund is the state of Florida's official private fund established to provide financial assistance to our communities as they respond to and recover from times of emergency or disaster. In partnership with public, private, and non-governmental organizations, the Florida Disaster Fund supports response and recovery activities. To contribute, you can go to the floridadisasterfund.org or text disaster to 20222. We did add this link here, which is the volunteerflorida.org, to where you can donate. It is also in the video description. Survivors can apply for disaster assistance if you are in need of this assistance and you're currently watching this. Survivors can apply for disaster assistance at disasterassistance.gov or by calling 800-621-3362. That is the American line for that, from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, or by using the FEMA mobile app. And Pawleys Island is already seeing massive flooding up here in South Carolina as a result of the second landfall here up in South Carolina. Take a look. Once again, those storm surges are continuing. They are continuing. So there are lots and lots and lots of people who are currently at risk. Extensive risk. You can see here in the background, it's already, if we go back to that drone footage, you can see where it's already driving inland here. Just sinking trees to the ocean there. So already massive amounts of more response will be needed for many other regions across the United States. Do not forget that Cuba is also suffering pretty significantly. 2 people died as a result of the hurricane there when it made landfall inside of western Cuba. And also the entire nation is without power as well. Couple of different things. We'll jump up here to New York, where the Russian consulate was vandalized. A masked and hooded individual with large quantities of red spray paint vandalized the consulate, covering the building with the red paint. And you can see that here. And then down here on Capitol Hill, the United States Senate approved the allocation of $12.4 billion in aid to Ukraine. The United States Senate approved a bill to continue government funding through December 16th. The funding includes $12.3 billion in both military and economic aid for Ukraine. And if you want some more information on that, you can check out here. This is democracynow.org. But that allows us to jump into kind of some of the more interesting topics of the night. So these little purple bubbles, for those that don't know, we try to end the night on a good or interesting news topics. Try and be a little bit more uplifting after a lot of really depressing and hard-hitting stuff. And so the first thing, we're actually jumping back over here into the Baltic Sea, where we see that a 15th century Baltic warship serving as a floating castle for an intrepid king was found. The finds on the wreck of the Grubshuden, or Hunden, the flagship of King Hans or John of Denmark, until it sank in 1495. The vessel piled in the seas with the fearsome warship of war, armed with dozens of guns and packed with soldiers. The 115-foot long or 35-meter wooden ship was one of the first vessels designed to carry artillery guns. And also utilized the new Carvel shipbuilding technique imported to the Baltics from the Mediterranean. Of joining the planks of the hull edge to edge on the wooden frame instead of overlapping them in lap strakes. You see the remnants of the warship there. Which, considering it's been sunk in underwater as a wooden ship since 1495, is in remarkably good condition. The Northern Atlantic and the Baltic Seas, as well as, I believe, the Dead Sea, are absolutely amazing for preservation of ships, because it's just, there's so little that can live there to eat away wood and things. It's amazing for preservation of like wooden ships and very old ships for long durations of time. Jump over here, where in Washington here, the FDA approved a promising treatment for Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. Drug Relyvrio won FDA approval yesterday amid intense outpouring of ALS patients, and based on a study of 137 people that appeared to show extended survival times versus placebo. The manufacturer, Amylyx, pledged to pull the drug from the market if an ongoing 600-person trial does not confirm its benefits. So, good to see that. ALS now has a very promising treatment, which is amazing. I hope that helps a lot of people. And the DART asteroid collision was captured by the Hubble and James Webb telescopes, as well as different observatories across the world. The DART spacecraft smashed into the asteroid Dimorphos, which is 7 million miles or 11 million kilometers from Earth at 7:14 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, September 26. It marks humanity's first attempt to test its planetary defense system by altering an asteroid's trajectory. The James Webb Space Telescope studied the collision over a time frame of roughly 5 hours, snapping 10 images, while Hubble captured 45 images of the moments immediately before and after the impact. Stitched together, the pictures show a wispy plume of material suddenly spiking out from Dimorphos after the DART crash, with the asteroid becoming 3 times as bright for 8 hours following the event. We can see that here. And so that is Hubble. This is the James Webb Telescope. You can see all that debris and that light coming off of it. If you want more info from that, you can get more stuff from Live Science. And 2 other videos were also taken of the crash's aftermath by 2 terrestrial telescopes. The Hawaiian Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, and one of the Las Cumbres Observatory and South African telescopes both captured videos of the impact, showing a bright puff of dust and rubble plume from the Dimorphos at the moment of impact. So this is coming from ATLAS. And we have impact. You can see the plume of dust coming off of that. Little puff. And this is from the South African Observatory. It's pretty neat. Once again, this thing's 7 million miles from Earth, by the way. So, pretty cool. So, we'll see how they still have a lot of tracking to do. They have a lot of work to do to see if it actually works. JL said, it's kind of sad that there's no dinosaur news. I know, I am too. But it's okay. We can't have dinosaur news every day. Otherwise, it wouldn't be news, huh? But other than that, that is everything in the world today. Yeah, Rooster Sideburns, we're making war on asteroids. Yes, we are. I don't want to go extinct. But with that, that is everything in the news today. A lot of stuff happening. Obviously, we have political turmoil in Burkina Faso. We have the annexation in Ukraine of those territories, which are now under, according to Russia, considered Russian. If you're anybody else, it's not. You're seeing the Nord Stream pipeline investigations ongoing. You're seeing Ukraine is going for NATO. Russia is bombing Iraq. There's Hurricane Ian recovery. There's a ton of stuff happening. And a lot of this, as you may have noticed, is not generally good. It's kind of dark and depressing. So please help us put a little bit of good back into the world, a little bit of light stuff back into the world, by going and checking out the video description. And you can check out for stuff for Ukraine, the Horn of Africa, Southeast Asia. We have stuff for Hurricane Ian now. There's stuff for different, cancer patients and all sorts of other stuff. 80% or more of all the donations the organizations in the description receive all go immediately to their programs and helping people. And so it's all a bunch of stuff happening, and we want to be able to do a little bit of help back and, put a little bit of hope in these people's lives that are affected by the very same crisis we talk about every single day. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, please give a little. If you can't give anything else, if you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Help us grow this project. The more people that come here and watch this, and the more people that join in on this community, the more of an impact we're going to have. So please give us a like, subscribe. You can follow and share our stuff on Twitter and other social media accounts, which we have linked in the description below. You can join our Discord, and please join our Discord. And if you have more organizations, share them with us. Please tell a staff member. Shoot us a link in a short description. We'll get the vetting process started like we are now for others. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope that you, your family, and your friends remain safe. And if not, I hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. We hope that you'll see us back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. At 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central. And we hope to see you guys again for these areas that for a little bit of an earlier stream on your Saturday. But have a great night, everybody. My name is Paul Ben from the New News, and see you around.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти в новахи, і чудно кличі, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлейфуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти в новахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бочок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти в новахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkled bum. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти в новахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти в новахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going